Hello and welcome to Listen Up podcast, brought to you by Abbeycare Recovery. And today we've got a special guest. We've got former professional footballer Clarke Carlisle on the show today. Welcome, Clarke.
Good morning, Eddie.
Great to see you. Clarke, as I said, was a former professional footballer, and he was also the chairman of the English Players Football Association. Clarke came up here last night and joined us at our Abbeycare Buddy's Recovery and Wellbeing Hub, and he was kind enough to share last night as well. So you've been in a bit of demand since you've been up here in Scotland, Clarke, but thank you for coming up. How are you?
Do you know, I'm incredibly well today. Thank you, Eddie. And it was awesome to be at the Buddy session last night. You know, oftentimes you go and do your stuff and you're living your life and you forget the power of that connection, you know, when you get in the rooms. So yeah, I came up and I shared, and hopefully I shared some things that resonated with people. But you forget how much you get from doing that, you know. And I slept well last night. You know, I slept. I know people say that I slept like a baby. I'm like, what? You woke up every 2 hours for a feed? I'm like, no, I slept like an inanimate object last night. You know, it was wonderful. So thank you for letting me be a part of that.
Thank you so much for coming, Clarke. And I know you were tired after a long journey and a long day yesterday. So we just want to open up as well, obviously. Clarke Carlisle, known professional footballer. Tell us a wee bit about your football career. How did that and when did that start?
So my football career started in 94, it would have been, 93 maybe. I signed as a schoolboy for Blackburn Rovers. And they just won the Premier League, one of the first, years of the Premier League. Jack Walker was putting his money in. We had Sheeran Sutton up front, and Big Colin Hendry was my mentor. And they just built the big Blackburn Rovers indoor centre, the brick. And to jump to that as the start is a jump, to be honest. You know, I've got to say, I love football from a kid. You know, my dad used to play Saturday and Sunday leagues in Preston, and that was my quality time with him, you know, and he was awesome. But he didn't get his opportunities for one reason or another. And then it was about me. But I started relatively late because we used to go to the Mormon church when I was a kid. And at the Mormon church, you can't do things on a Sunday.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, you're not allowed, I think you're not allowed to work. So, I wasn't allowed to play football. We weren't allowed to watch telly, all of that stuff. But we stopped going there when I was 11 years old. And that's when my dad let me start to play football. Like organised football. Before that, it was just me pretending to be Pele on the settee doing overhead kicks. And I remember my first game, Sunday League, was at AFC Ribble, and they had a decent side. And their manager said, "Well, he's going to have to be good to get in our side. You know, we've got a good junior side." We played against Coppell. We won 11-0, and I scored 6. And the coach went to my dad. He went, "Yeah, Clarke can come back next week." So it started there, and then I went to Blackburn, signed schoolboy forms, and they released me at 14 years of age after 2 years, because at that point I was a central midfielder. And I was playing alongside a guy called David Dunn. Don't know if you've heard of him. But they kept Dunny on and released me. And that broke my heart. It broke my heart. It broke my world, you know, because I was desperate to be a footballer. I really was. I loved it. The first book I ever had was My Life and the Beautiful Game. And it was Robert Elfish's biography of Pele. And I devoured that book. You know, I had this dream of me coming from the slums of Preston to be the world's greatest footballer. And more than that, my dad gave me that book, you know, so that meant something to me. And so when Blackburn released me at 14, mate, it broke me. I cried for 3 days solid, and I vowed never to play the game again. And on the third day, a scout came from Blackpool, an incredible man called Fred O'Donoghue. And Fred O'Donoghue, he chapped on the front door, Paul. He chapped the door. And he said, he said to me, "Dad, I hear your lad's been released from Blackburn. I've been waiting for your son, Merv. My dad was called Mervyn because Fred scouted my dad when my dad was 17. And he said, I've been waiting for your son Merv, and I want him to come to Blackpool and train with us. And so Blackpool signed me on a Centre of Excellence and then an apprentice there. So that's where it started. And my first day at Blackpool was the day after my last GCSE. I moved away from home into a classic Blackpool seafront guest house, like five floors, 20 odd rooms, and there were 11 or 12 of us YTSs were called, living in there. And I was on, Eddie, £27.50 a week. Boom. I'd made it, I mean, people need to understand that we came from nothing. We were a council estate family in Preston. I had a black father and a white mother, and I know that there's a lot of divisive rhetoric now, and it's getting quite touchy. But I'm talking about the 70s. This is one of the first generations of what were called interracial relationships, and my dad, he had to fight people to walk down the street with my mum. This was the environment. He was raising a family. He couldn't get a job because he was a 6'5" imposing black man. He was intelligent, hardworking, but as soon as he tried to aspire, people wanted to put him in his place. Don't get above your station, and we never had two halfpennies to rub together. So to go and get paid to play football. And to potentially realise this dream, it was incredible, absolutely incredible.
Amazing, and we'll catch up with how that football career went later on. So you were speaking there a bit about home life growing up. How was home life for you growing up, and the dynamics you were speaking about there? How were you as a person, Clarke, as a child?
As a kid, I see the few pictures that we got of me as a kid, and I just had a smile on my face all the time, I can see it especially in our youngest now, just a zeal for life, just a want to be involved in everything. Well, below the surface of that, we'll talk about my life experience and my my issues with alcohol, with gambling, with a whole array of stuff. But what I think often gets lost when people are trying to address their behaviours and things they're engaging with, what gets lost is the core reasons why, and to my mind, and what's been the foundation for me being in this place of wellness today, it is my understanding of the fact that the action is utterly irrelevant.
Yeah.
The what I do is utterly irrelevant.
Absolutely.
What I needed to learn and acknowledge and change was my motivation to engage in the action. So why am I doing it? And the very beginnings of why am I doing this, what I found, it all stemmed from my childhood. What I realised was that as a 35-year-old man, I was having emotional responses and engaging in behaviours because I was reacting like a 6-year-old child. So to go back to that, my old man, I rarely saw him. He carried that classic traditional identity of what it was to be a man. He was hunter, gatherer, provider, disciplinarian, and because he couldn't fulfill those and he was desperate to do the best for his family and his kids, he locked himself in his room and he smoked weed. I didn't see him for large sways of childhood, and I only ever saw him when I was very good, and he'd come out and he'd say, "Well done, son," ruffle my afro, or he'd say, when he'd come out when I was very bad. And like I say, this is a big 6'5" black guy with the hand the size of Africa, and boom, I would feel the back of his hand when I was bad, and I didn't want that. I was desperate for my dad's approval, and so I strove to be good. I strove to get that positive affirmation from dad. And what happened in tandem with that is that mum was my love in the household. She was the consistent safe space. But I, probably due to the environment, I wet the bed until I was like 16 years of age. And when I say that, I mean like every night up until 14, 15, I wet the bed. And then it kind of tapered off and still carried on probably, you know, sporadically up until about 18. But every single morning, I'd wake up with sodden sheets, and my mum had tried everything. We'd been to the doctors, we'd got alarms, we'd got plastic sheets. You know, she's putting a teenage boy in terry towel nappies before bed. She's hoying my mattress on the front garden, which filled me with so much shame and embarrassment and all of that. And that happened every single morning. So every day when I left the house, I was desperate to redeem myself in my mum's eyes, because she's my love, she's my safety, you know. So I had to go out and achieve something. I had to go and get full marks in a test. I had to go and win a match. I had to go and get on a team or a representative team so I could come home and present that and redeem the love and gain the approval of my old man, you know. So that meant that as a child, everything about me and whether I'm good enough was all anchored in external validation. It was all anchored in achievements. It was all anchored in being perfect and winning and being the best. And there were so many things that fed into that, you know, the self-determination was, I was a half-caste kid growing up. You know, that's the terminology we use. This is crazy, you know. So we called ourselves half-caste. I was half-caste. My older brother and sister had a different dad who was half-caste, so they were quarter-caste. And we happily called ourselves that. But then you go into society and they're like, no, you can't say that anymore. You're coloured kids. And they're like, oh, no, you can't say that anymore. You're mixed-race kids. Oh, no, you can't say that. You're mixed heritage. Oh, no, you can't say that. You're people of colour. I'm like, who's making these decisions on what my identity is and how I and we as a family can you know, call ourselves? So you got that. But going into we lived on a council estate and it was heavily white. You know, I'm talking like 99%. And when you're in that environment as a kid, you don't make friends because you're an anomaly. You know, people, you're an other. And people be like, oh, let me touch your hair. What happens when it gets wet? And all of this. So you have to win friends. You have to earn them. You know, so even when I'm going out to play, it's not as though I can just be and chat with people. I had to go and achieve. I had to go and be the funniest. I had to go and be the most mischievous. I had to do something that won these people over. And then I get into school, which is exactly the same, where, you know, 1,000 kids and there were maybe half a dozen people who weren't white. 3 of them were my siblings, you know. So we're talking about a dynamic where all through my childhood, I molded myself to fit in wherever I was and to be whatever it is that person needed.
And that's a huge pressure on a child, isn't it, Clarke? You know, I'm just thinking there about the amount of areas that you're having to portray who people want you to be for a child. That's unbelievable pressure.
It is. The incredible thing about it, Eddie, and we spoke about this earlier off air, is that, but that's just my childhood.
Yeah.
That it just is. You know, when you're going through it, you don't think about it in comparative terms. You just think that this is life, you know, and it's normal for everyone. It's only when you start getting into your late teens and adulthood that you look back and you think, wow, you know, other people had it different. It could have been so different. And this is an important point. I don't look back at all of that with any blame. Yeah. I'm not pointing fingers at people. You know, it's important for me to acknowledge that this is what was, and these are the reasons why, as a 30-year-old man, when I, you know, felt as though I was embarrassed in a situation, I couldn't show it. Yeah. You know, when I felt I wasn't going to be good enough in a situation, I avoided it. You know, that it's to understand the reasons why I made these auto response and emotional responses in situations. So that all of that lent to me being a people pleaser. a social butterfly, absolute chameleon, and that could change from room to room and minute to minute, let alone day to day and week to week, you know. And I became brilliant at it, you know. You would struggle to find a person who had a bad word to say about me as a kid, and that's because it was my mission to make people love me. And so when you get into football, football's the perfect environment for that, Eddie.
Yeah.
You know, because it doesn't matter what I think about what I did in training or what I did in the game. What matters is what the manager thinks. What has a huge impact is what the fans think. You know, are they going to sing positive songs about me? Or when I do something good, are they going to give that ironic, yay, which they might think is funny, but it has a profound impact on someone's impression of your capabilities. What matters is what the chairperson thinks, whether they're going to give me a contract or what the journalist thinks. You know, when I start at Blackpool and there's 4,500 people in the stand, your boss being one of them, you know, there are 4,500 people who saw me play. One of those people is a journalist who gives me a 3 out of 10, which is their own opinion. And they show that to 3 million people who weren't even at the game, you know? And the impact of that, I don't think people understand this, that the impact of that is football has this illusion of ownership. You know, when you're a player, the fans own you. You're theirs, you know, and football is everything. You know, there is nothing more important than football. So should I play poorly on Saturday and then I'm out on Sunday with my family having Sunday lunch and, you know, we're enjoying ourselves, I have had people come to our table and say, look at you, you don't even care. Yeah. Look at you laughing and joking and you know, we got beat 4-0 yesterday. You're a disgrace. And I'm like, it's just it's invasive. And this was the early days. This is before social media. You know, once social media started to come on the scene, which it did, I had a foot in both camps. You know, I would get home after a game, Burnley in the Premier League, and on Twitter, as it was then, I would have literally thousands of messages that were being sent in real time telling me how I was. Yeah. Or sometimes nice. Yeah. But when you are a people pleaser, you can have 99 great ones, but the one negative one is the one that hooks you, you know, and then it would be my life's mission to convince that person that, you know, oh no, I'm a good person. And that is the consequence of that growing up and me going into football, is that I had no sense of my own value and self-esteem. And everything was tied into football. Mm-hmm. So if I played well, then I was a good human and I was allowed to smile and I could go home and be nice to, you know, and be interactive with my family. If I played poorly, I was a bad human and I didn't deserve good things, and you're not going to have any cake, and you shouldn't smile and you shouldn't go out. And that's the impact that it had on me. Yeah.
And you still see that today, don't you, what you're speaking about there, and thank you for sharing that kind of perspective from a footballer as well, because there's a lot of kind of football fans, like after a defeat, that you're not allowed to go about your daily life and, you know, kind of like you're speaking there where you're out with your family and stuff, you know, it's, and you're correct, that kind of ownership, and especially online nowadays, where people have got no filter and no care for another person, where they're going to tell them what they should do. They'll tell a football manager what the team should be. They'll tell the footballer how they should be playing, and it's become really kind of sick, hasn't it? You know?
Yeah, it's a shame, because football went through this era post Premier League and money boom, where the gap between fans and players was just huge. Yeah. You know, there was a massive disconnect, and social media, it was a potential bridge. You know, it gave access again. You know, it brought people closer together, and it is used in a good way by some people in that manner. But with that, and with that 24/7 access, comes the opportunity to spit bile. You know, and I'm not sure everyone is aware of how cutting that bile can be. You know, it might just be 240 characters or whatever it is on your phone that you're throwing into the ether. But when I'm sat at home with my child on my lap, that's come straight into my world. You know, back in the day growing up, home was sanctuary. You know, in the 80s, you shut the front door and the world was outside. You know, and you could control everything and it was safe. But that's not the case anymore. You know, you've got 700 channels on the telly that bring you every bit of information from the world in, you know, and the vast majority of that, because of the way that we consume, you know, media nowadays, is largely negative, you know, and people have 24/7 access to me in my sanctuary. And it took a long while for me to set the boundaries on that. Just because I'm accessible 24/7 doesn't mean I should be available 24/7, you know. And the legacy of that sanctuary growing up, it had a serious impact on the way I dealt with trauma in later life because, you know, because it was sanctuary and it was Dad's castle. If I ever spoke about anything to do with the family when we were outside of the house, I'd come back home and Dad would be like, "Hey, you don't talk about our business outside this house." Oh, I'm sorry, Dad. But hey, I'll give you something to cry about. You know, so everything that I was conditioned to do, both in my family and societally. You remember the Rocky films?
Yeah.
You know, the doctor says, "Don't do it, Rocky." Your wife says, "Don't do it, Rocky." But he's like, "Adrian." And, you know, it's all positioned as though, you don't listen to advice. You don't share anything. You overcome these obstacles. And that makes you a winner. You know, so that was ingrained in me. And Mum was the same. You know, everything's kicking off in the house, but we get outside. "How are you, Rosemary?" "Everything's excellent, thank you." You know, but to me as a young lad, when World War III's kicking off in the house, I'm like, oh, so if something is going on, then I lie about it. I cover it up. I pretend everything's all right. Now, that learnt behaviour, I didn't know that was learnt behaviour until something happens and you react in that. And what happened to me was I had 4 great years at Blackpool. You know, my home league debut was, ironically enough, against Carlisle United. I don't know if you'll remember this, Paul, but it was 1-1, 90th minute, and we had a corner on the left-hand side. It was whipped in, flicked on at the front post, and bang, there was yours truly to score a 91st minute winner. I went herring over to the corner of the stand. Mum, Dad and Grandad in the stand. And veins popping out where I didn't know veins existed. And that moment there, it was utterly incredible. Yeah. You know, I cannot articulate the euphoria, the emotion, because it was more than just a goal and scoring. It was like, it was showing me Mum that, I'm good at this, I've achieved it. It was paying me Dad and Grandad back because they, for 5 years, had ferried me up and down the country, at times going without food so that they can put petrol in the car to, in search of this dream. And I'd done it. And it was amazing. And from there, I got my first professional contract, 4 years at Blackpool. And in my last year, actually, we got relegated to what is now League Two. It was old Division 3. But I was Player of the Year. And, it's kind of like your but I'm all right. I know it sounds crass, but, it's a self-preservation society. Like, you lot rubbish. No, but they sold me down to QPR, 250 grand, and this was massive for me.
Yeah.
Year 2000, £250,000, like someone paid for my services. I became a footballing commodity. And I went from £500 a week at Blackpool to £2,500 a week at QPR at 20. Coming from absolutely nothing. This was enormous. And we're now playing in front of 19,000, on the telly. I got a call up for England under-21s. So I told you how proud I was at Bloomfield Road. Can you imagine how proud I was it was at Middlesbrough's BT Cellnet Stadium? 3 lines on my chest, singing the national anthem. Mum, Dad and Grandad all in tears. It was phenomenal. Playing football was giving me everything I'd ever wanted. And excuse me, there were trappings that came with that. You know, I started to knock around with these guys. I'm going around West London with Joe Cole, Ashley Cole, John Terry. I'm getting in nightclubs for free, and girls are giving me attention. I'm like, yes, I like this. You know, I'm liking all of the trappings that come with the proficiency. It's important to say that because I think some people they want the trappings first, without focusing on the proficiency. I think that's that instant gratification society that we're kind of creating. But anyhow, it's another podcast. You know, I was loving life. And then we had a game. It was a home derby against Fulham, West London derby. And I went in for a tackle with Rufus Brevet and bang, boom, I snapped my ACL, LCL, popped the TS, ITB, rotated the fibula head, dislodged the nerve, ripped the hamstring off my right knee. And just comprehensive. You know, I went to see a specialist the next day, Mr. Williams, Andy Williams, and he said, "Clarke, your knee's buggered." I was like, "Oh, thanks, Doc." He said, "Well, no, I'm a mister, actually, but seriously, your knee's buggered." He said, "You're going to have to prepare yourself to walk with a stick, let alone play football again." So, you know, having tried to articulate what football meant to me, can you imagine what my head was like in that moment where it was just gone?
Can you try and describe what that feels like? Because you can't, you know, what is that like for a young man who's...
If I put you in the situation, I had an operation and then I was housebound with my knee in a brace, not supposed to move far for 6 weeks, in a 2-bed flat in Acton, 250 miles away from home, not going into work. I had a girlfriend at the time who was just popping in sporadically to check if I'm all right. And I'm sat there thinking that everything that makes me worth it, that makes me acceptable, that makes my dad proud, that makes my mum love me, that makes my life worthwhile, it's just gone. And I don't talk to anyone because of everything that I've just said. Talking's not a thing. It's not even a thing in 2000. You know, it's not a thing, let alone, the generational stuff that I was just talking about. And the coping strategy, the physio said, just chill out, have a drink, you know, and that was comfortable to me. You know, I'd found drinking in the park with my friends at 12 years of age. You know, that's what we did with a 3-litre bottle of ye old English cider and a joint and playing 2 drag drop, you know, around the circle. That's what we did for fun. And I found in that after a couple of drinks, I didn't really care what people thought anymore. You know, and we might get into it again later, but this is the thing about alcohol for me. It wasn't that I needed alcohol to function. That people-pleasing and that constant analysis and debrief and 100-mile-an-hour thinking that I had, what I found was after probably 4 or 5 drinks, 4 or 5 pints, I wasn't concerned what you were thinking anymore. And the lift, the release of that pressure was amazing. And then at about 10 pints in, I actually gave 0. And it was that whole lift of responsibility and burden that was what I sought. It was that relief from the thinking and the concern and the winning people over. But the thing is, with alcohol, as people know, when you're 10 pints in, all of your judgment, your decision making, your responsibility, your threat assessment, all of that goes out the window. You know, so me seeking slight relief from this brain and the emotions and stuff meant that I was repeatedly putting myself in these positions where I'm not in control. And not only that, I've got that irresponsible drunk mind of what is funny, what is acceptable, what I can get away with. You put that in tandem with the elite athletes' kind of superhero complex, because that's what you develop. You think that I'm invincible. You know, I'll win everything. I'm the best at everything. Nothing will take me down. And I put myself in some incredible situations, including this one. You know, I was in my flat. I used a company called Dialer Crate. I rang them up. I've created a Carling, 2 bottles of Chablis, 40 Marlborough Lights, and I sat on a futon in Acton, and I drank myself into oblivion. You know, I placed that order probably six days a week for a 5-week period, and in that space, my head told me that without football, I was nothing.
Okay.
With you know, nobody would have any time, love, or respect for me. And so I took an overdose. But my girlfriend came in, you know, just to bring me some flowers, cheer me up, and rushed me to the hospital. They pumped my stomach, and I survived. But it's not as though nowadays that would be not just a flag, that would be an entry point to services.
Yeah.
You know, but this was February 2001, this was. The club physio came and discharged me from hospital because the club didn't want anyone to know what had happened. Okay. And they said, look, Clarke, that was silly. Don't do that again. I'm like, oh, okay, sorry. And I couldn't tell anyone around me. I couldn't tell my parents. You know, they're still living in a council house in Preston. How can I tell them that Billy Big Balls living the high life? Oh, Mum, my life's not all that. I couldn't, nor was it a thing.
Yeah.
You know, it just wasn't a thing. So we boxed it off, pushed it under the table, and pretended it never happened. Now, that there is the inception of my depression. I know that now, retrospectively, through therapy and all the rest, but neither did I or anyone around me know at the time. We just thought I'd gotten away with one, crack on. And from that point, in 2001, that injury that saw off, a similar injury saw off Pierluigi Casaraghi, who was Chelsea's most expensive sign at the time. It didn't see me off because I applied everything that my dad had taught me. This guy whose life wasn't what he wanted it to be. Life had slapped him and held him down, but he instilled in us kids. He said, look, if you work hard, if you give everything you've got, you can achieve anything. Which is utterly incredible, Eddie. Oh. You know, this is a guy who was slapped down by so much, but he didn't burden us with it. You know, you see a lot of people who do share their experiences, especially when there are elements of discrimination involved, you know, and they pass them on to intergenerationally. But Dad didn't put that on us. You know, he wanted us to stand on our own feet and represent ourselves. And I took that into my injury, and I worked hard, mate. And I was out for 2 years, 22 months, but I got back. And not only did I get back, I got back and I played 550 games. Wow. You know, at QPR, we got to play a final at Millennium Stadium. We got beat by Cardiff, in Cardiff. It was disgusting, but the following season, you know, we learned from that and we got promoted automatically. And then I went to Leeds United, biggest club of my career. Yeah. Name-wise, went to Watford, again, Millennium Stadium. We beat Leeds United, got promoted to the Premier League. And then the manager at Watford said, Clarke, you're too old, you're too slow. I'm selling you to Burnley. And the papers called me a veteran journeyman. Oh. I was 27. But I'm a veteran journeyman. And then I went to Burnley thinking, because I'm from Preston, I thought, right, I'll lay down some roots, I'll get ready for retirement because I'm an old man. Little did I know I was about to embark on the most successful part of my career at Burnley. You know, with the single most unprofessional manager I've ever had, Owen Coyle, this guy. We used to play crossing and shooting for Krispy Kreme donuts and small-sided games for crates of Iron Brew. And if you lost, you had to bring those in on a Friday, and that was our lunch the day before a game. Mate, we were the fattest squad in the championship, but we were the happiest squad in the championship. And you know, the thing about Owen is that he was like, we call it person-centered nowadays. When you came in the morning, it'd be, hey, Clarke, how's Gemma? How are the kids? Are they good? Yeah, excellent. Right, let's go play some football. You know, so it was like person first, football next, and everything. He brought the family in. We were so connected. And we would run through brick walls for each other, you know, that some of my tightest relationships were in that group with the likes of Stevie Caldwell, who was our skipper, who I'd love to have a snog with. Honestly, he always had a stubble and he'd winch me. I'll get you good winching. I'd have a big rash on my face. Graham Alexander, who is, you know, my closest friend and the most incredible human I've ever met in the game. Wonderful humans. And we got to play our final Millennium Stadium. The refurbished Wembley Stadium. 90,000 people. And I was man of the match.
Wow.
And we earned the right to play in the Premier League. And then we beat Man United at Turf Moor 1-0, reigning champions. You know, forget my grandkids. I'm going to tell your grandkids about that, Eddie. It's amazing. And then in football, as happens, you know, my mind gets better. I'm the best footballer I've been, but my body can't cash the check. And I go to Preston, York, Northampton. My last game of football is another playoff final, Northampton Town against Bradford at Wembley Stadium. In this time, I'm elected chairman of the PFA to represent my fellow colleagues. I do a degree in broadcasting to pave a career, you know, post-football. I present a couple of documentaries for the BBC. I write a book. I win Britain's Brainiest Footballer, and I win a Countdown Teapot, and I go on Question Time, and all of these things that to everyone on the outside look like a wonderful life. But in here, mate, I was in utter turmoil. And looking back over that period from 2001 to 2013 when I retired, it's blatantly clear. We say that guys don't talk, and I didn't talk. I didn't talk to anyone. But my actions were screaming that this is someone who's in need, someone who needs help. And when I look back, you could almost set your clock by it, like your calendar. Every 3 months, cyclically, I would explode in this irrational behaviour, you know. And in the early years, it was alcohol. It was 3, 4, 5 day drinking benders where I would just go missing. Yeah, you know. And excuse me, what I explained earlier, it was because all of the emotional turmoil, I didn't want to feel it. I couldn't feel it. My brain was like, whenever I felt like my career was threatened or you know, I felt this fear or sadness or shame or embarrassment, my brain was going, last time you tried to kill yourself, run away, run away. So that release I felt 10 pints deep, I never wanted it to end. Yeah. You know, so I was that guy who at 5 a.m. in the morning was crawling down the A4 looking for an off license or a house party to invade. You know, I never wanted that feeling of release, of freedom to end. And when I was at QPR in 2003, Ian Holloway was the manager, and I'd always held my boundaries, right? So I would do it at certain times of the week, but I'd never jeopardize a match day. Yeah, you know, and then as is, you know, when you get into these addictive and obsessive behaviours, I stomped all over them boundaries. You know, that's the depth that I got to, and I turned up for the bus to go to Colchester, and I was absolutely stinking. You know, I'd had an Oscars party the night before, any excuse to get larruped, and Ian Holloway said, he's Clarke, I can smell you from the front of the bus. He said, get off, go home, come in tomorrow and train with the kids. And I got off the bus. Did I go home? Of course I didn't. I went straight down the pub, you know, and I got absolutely battered. I didn't turn up the next day for training. And, you know, this is one of those kind of sliding doors moments, because Ollie was on the phone to the chairman to sack me. And I called him while he was mid-conversation. I was in the pub and I rang him. I was absolutely steaming. I said, Ollie, I don't want to be doing this. I said, I don't want to drink, but I just can't say no. And he, you know, one of the most magnanimous responses that really helped me, he said, look, Clarke, I don't know how to help you, but I can find a man who can. And they put me in touch with Peter Kay in the Sporting Chance Clinic. And I went into rehab, 28 days, came out of there. It was outstanding. You know, I went in on my own. I'm the only person to go in on their own and go through the 28 days on their own. Right. And it was amazing for me. It was the first time I was honest in my life, first time I'd shared some feelings. Peter Kay and I connected on a level. He almost became a surrogate father, which was dysfunctional, but I only know that now in my wellness, you know. Okay. And I came out of there and I was sober for 2 years. But still, Eddie, every 3 months, I would explode in this irrational behaviour, but I just wasn't drinking anymore. So now it would be gambling.
Yeah.
I'd go to the casino. I'd hide in a corner, stay there for 2 days. Oh, I've got the flu, but I'm in the casino. Computer games. All right, get this. I remember I would ring in saying I've got flu because I'm at home on my computer playing Championship Manager, trying to get virtual Clarkey to the Premier League.
Yeah.
I'm playing in the Premier League. I'm like, what the hell is going on? The illogical aspect of it all. When I was experiencing a severe depressive episode, I had hypersomnia. So I could sleep for 40, 50 hours straight.
Wow.
And I don't mean potter around the house in my dressing gown.
Mm-hmm.
I mean in my pit, pissing in bottles by the side of the bed, and just done to the world. And when I was in there, I couldn't open my eyes to engage with my family, let alone, get up and engage with the world. It's one of the hardest things to articulate. I remember, and this was only a flashback memory, right? It's not tiredness, Eddie. My head shuts down.
Yeah.
Do you remember that old Windows thing?
Yeah.
My brain shuts down. And I remember once, this was when I was at QPR. So in that period, I came to, and I was in the middle lane of the A40 out of Shepherd's Bush. I wasn't tired or anything. My brain had just shut down in the car, and this car's whizzing past me. And I was like, oh my God. And I looked back, I was like, wow, that was me in the depths of a depressive episode. But I woke up, I drove off, and I was like, oh, I must be tired. Mm-hmm. Because I have no comprehension that these are signs, symptoms of something wider that's going on. And it got to a point where, I couldn't understand it, because all of those things that I was doing, the professional persona, the human that I wanted to be, the father, the husband, the son, the contributor to society, these actions that I was taking, they were totally contrary to that. And I didn't get it, and it caused so much conflict. I'm like, Clarke, why are you such a d***? Well, why do you make these decisions and you don't want them? And then in 2010, my ex-wife, Gemma, she just had our second child, my third. There's more to come. Keep up. And we're at Burnley, just been promoted, best contract, lovely house, lovely cars, and I'm coming home and she's crying, and I'm like, what more can I do for you?
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm doing this for you, this for the kids, this for the club, this for the PFA, this for uni. I'm like, when do I have a minute for myself? And I used to use that narrative as justification for me going on a bender. I'm like, oh, that's it, I'm off. I'm going to have some me time. It was me time.
Yeah.
Was it constructive me time? Was it productive? Did it help? Well, the way that I did it, no. I usually came back with far more problems than when I went out. But my ex-wife, Gemma, she said to me, look, I've got postnatal depression. Read up on it. So I did. I read it. I was like, oh, that's me. Rang the doc at Burnley. I'm like, Doc, I'm reading about postnatal depression. I think I've got it, but I've not had a baby. It's like, wow, Clarke, we went through all the checks. He's like, yeah, you've got depression, so here's a pill. Fluoxetine. I was like, oh, thanks, Doc. So I walk away with this label of depression, which I embrace, because to me in that moment, I'm like, oh, it all makes sense now. Did I take this pill? Of course not. Why not? Well, because I'm a man. I'm a Premier League footballer. I'm chairman of the PFA. I don't need no happy pills. So, and added on to that, in football, there's a strict liability rule, and there were lots of players going through cross-contamination cases where they were getting a 2-year ban from football, and, you can't fight that. If it's in your system, strict liability. So I was like, A, I don't need happy pills, and B, I've already lost 2 years to injury. I'm not losing 2 more.
Yeah.
So I walk off into life thinking that I'm okay because now I've got this label. But I didn't do anything about it, Eddie. So when I get to retirement, even though I'd worked for a new career, Even though I stepped into a new career with ITV, I mean, you know, I did the World Cup in Brazil. Yeah. You know, commentating on the World Cup final at the Maracanã, sitting on Ipanema Beach with a fresh coconut. What you doing? Working. You know, it's insane. Yeah. But I can't remember a single thing about it because I was in the longest and deepest depressive episode of my life. Mm-hmm. And when I came back from there in 2014, in my mind, the narrative was that I was an abject failure without football. I had a person come to me in the street and say, "Oh, didn't you used to be Clarke Carlisle?" I'm like, "Oh, no, I still am. I just don't play football anymore," you know, and little things like that compounded this notion that without football, I was no one. And all of this internal narrative that had been so destructive that you're a fraud, you're a charlatan, you're going to get exposed today. Who do you think you are? All of this, it was my truth. Mm. And one of the legacies from this suicide attempt in 2001, it wasn't that I'd attempted to take my own life. It was that I'd failed. That hurt me. Right. I'm an elite athlete. I don't fail. So when it came to 2014 and I believed that everyone in my life would be better if I wasn't here, the answer was that I die and I was going to make sure it was comprehensive. So I put myself in front of a lorry on the A64 and mate, Bless doesn't even cover it. I was airlifted to hospital, 2 days of operations. You can see the scars, you know, got all these scars here. My wife calls it my tailoring. She says, this is where I was tailor-made for her. I didn't break a single bone in my body, Eddie, which is insane. You know, it's from that moment is where my approach to life and to my illness and to wellness changed. I had 2 stays in psychiatric hospital, but they were private. And the thing about that is, when I was in there, it was great, but when I left, I had a pamphlet. Yeah. You know, the aftercare isn't part of the service. And in 2017 is the last time that I was actively suicidal. I was walking the streets of London looking for a responsible way to die. And I was found by 2 Scouse angels who... The only reason they stepped to me, because, I mean, why I don't know if I have to say this, but all of this that's happened, it played out in a national narrative. Yeah. You know, this was news. It was Sky News, breaking news. It was in the papers, all of this stuff. So it's not as though this was my little secret. This is all very publicly playing out. I'm strolling around Liverpool looking for a responsible way to die, and there's these 2 guys, and the only reason that they approached me in that scenario was because their best friend had taken his own life the week before. Mm. And they stepped to me and they said, "Clarke, do you know your family's looking for you?" And they said, "Look, we can't leave here because of what happened to our best friend. We've got to take you to safety." And they did. And I'm so grateful to them. Mm. And from there, they took me to a police station, not because it's a crime, but because that was a safe place. And from there, I went to Blackburn Psychiatric Hospital, which totally transformed me. You know, they introduced me to Cognitive Analytic Therapy, which was incredible. It was the first time, all of that stuff that I've explained, this was the first time it was mapped out for me. Mm. You know, mind mapping my thought processes. And it was an epiphany for me to see that when situation A happens, Z doesn't have to be the outcome, because that's how I'd live my life. So if I had an argument with a girlfriend, it's like, right, that relationship's done, it's finished, it's not perfect, you know, boom. So I would contrive a disaster to leave that relationship, you know, things like that. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be like that. And it was amazing to me that there were so many points in a situation and in my life where I could choose a different response. Yeah. And I was like, what? I can choose how to respond. I can consider and react in a scenario rather than avoiding. And it took me on an incredible journey of all of these emotions that I've suppressed for years, of not just letting them out, but learning them. You know, I would feel emotion, but I wouldn't know what it was. I couldn't tell you if it was guilt, if it was fear, if it was shame, because I'd suppressed it all, because they're negative. It's not what a man does.
Yeah.
Utter bullshit. So going on that exploration of not just knowing that I was feeling emotion, but what emotion is it? You know, where do I feel it? What does that feel like? And why do I feel that? You know, there are sometimes I would feel shame and embarrassment for things that are legacy of childhood. You know, it's a fear of being different. It's a fear of being embarrassed or punished. It's a fear of being ashamed of. But that fear, it doesn't hold weight as a 36-year-old man. But I didn't know it because I'd never taken the time to think about it. And so from there, coming through to now, where, you know, we're, 8 years from that moment, it probably took me a good 2 to 3 years to get solidly, consistently well. And after about 5 years, I got to a point where I realised, because I was still on medication, I was on private hospital, put me on loads of medications. I was rattling, but the NHS took them down. They said, look, we're going to take your meds down and put your therapy right up. A year of intense therapy, 1-to-1, but also sessions with my wife together every week.
Good, yeah.
And then after that, I'd go through blocks of therapy. And people position therapy as though it's something you do when times are you're in crisis, or when you're broken, or, you know. But I engage with it consistently now because it elevates who I am. It gives me a greater understanding of you know, my capabilities and my strengths and my best coping and response mechanisms, and helps me to position other people's positions in and experiences in my life. So go through that, and it was after about 4 years, I realised that, the medications had tapered the lows, but they were also tapering my highs.
Yeah.
Eddie, you know, I was going through things like children were being born. So I've got 2 children now with my wife, 5 in all. And I wasn't feeling what I knew I should. Does that make sense? You know, and I was like, I know I should be feeling here. And I could put the show on, but why is it not here? Why am I not feeling that joy where I feel the joy? So discussing with my wife, I'm like, look, I'm in a well place now. And I want to be a part of life again. I want to feel it all. And I know that coming off the meds, you know, will allow me to feel those highs, but it will also mean that the lows will come back.
Totally.
But I believe that I'm in the right place to manage them constructively and productively. So we did. Came off the meds. And if ever there was going to be a test, my dad died unexpectedly. You know, this man who... I know I've talked about him in that like consequential position there, but let me tell you, when I was in psych hospital and I was sat on bed next to my old man, and it was almost like the first time in my life I'd grown balls, you know, and I'd addressed that parental, rather than it being a parent-child relationship, I wanted to sit to him adult to adult.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, Dad? I said, I love you and I respect you, but I'm no longer afraid of you. I don't want to be afraid of it. He said, son, I've never wanted you to be afraid of me. He said, all I ever did was try and discipline you and teach you manners that I thought would set you instead for life. He said, and whether you're a footballer, a bin man, whatever you wanted to do, I am so proud of you. Wow. Oh my God, Eddie. We broke and melted in that moment. And from that moment, there was nothing unsaid between me and my dad. We got so close. We shared emotions. He told me about the racism and the reality of his experience growing up, and we were like this. And then he just died. And, you know, we try and put kind of like outcomes and metrics on wellness, don't we? Mate, that was my metric. You know, it was disgusting. It was hard and it was uncomfortable, but at no point was it dangerous. You know, I managed it. I spoke when I needed to with my counsellor around me, and after the fact, I can look back and say, yeah, do you know what? I'm well. Because to be well doesn't mean that I'm happy all the time.
Yeah.
To be well doesn't mean that life's a bed of roses. To be well means that I am present every day. And all of those successes and challenges and the highs and the lows, they come, and I process them in a contemporaneous, positive, constructive way. I just went off on that. That was that one question there.
Only asked you who did you play with in 2013. No, amazing, Clarke, and the time's running away with us as well.
I'm sorry.
It's no, that's absolutely amazing what you were sharing there. And just before we move on, I gave you a wee kind of challenge last night around about 3 significant songs. But just before we go into that, for anybody that's experiencing at the moment anything you're talking about there with their mental health or suicidal ideation and stuff like that, what would you be one bit of kind of advice you would pass on to them at this time?
It's going to take a little bit longer. I would like us to talk about suicidal ideation, because I didn't know this was a thing. Okay. You know, we often talk about the action, you know, but there's a lead into that. And ideation is when you're meticulously planning harm coming to you. You know, what it looks like. And I don't just mean, I wish I wasn't here today. Yeah. I'm talking like, you know what, I could do it here, I could do it there, or that plane could fall out of the sky, or it's going to be the 726 from King's Cross because I know it goes there. When you're planning, that is a huge alarm bell. Seek help. There's a stage just before that. And I remember this vividly when I was working for ITV, and I'd be driving long hours up and down the motorway at night, you know, going from stadium to studio, stadium, blah, blah, blah. And I remember I'd be like, I wonder how long I can drive with my eyes closed. 1, 2, 3, 4. I wonder how long I can drive with my lights off. 1, 2, 3. Do you know what? I could just throw this car into that bridge. Do you know what? I could just get straight into the back of that.
High risk behaviour.
Yes. Very, very high risk behaviour that you know is going to have some kind of catastrophic outcome. That is I would say the high end, but still alarm bell signs of the way that you're thinking. Reach out here. You know, if you're getting that notion, you know, I could just do this. This could just happen. And you're getting it consistently. Reach out there. Now, if I had advice to someone who's experiencing that, any of those, you know, those isolationist emotional moments, you know, I remember being at training at Northampton, and I would get there and I would sit in the car and I would cry. At 45 minutes crying. I don't know why I'm crying, Eddie. But then as soon as someone comes into view, I'm like, boom. You all right, Clarke? Yeah, sweet. Let's go to work. Let's play football. You know, you're getting these outbursts of emotions and you don't know why or what, but they're just uncontrollable. You're getting those feelings of fraudulence, of imposter. People don't know how you really think. You don't have to be like me. You don't have to tell everybody. But it's imperative that you tell somebody, and the right somebody. You know, I hear people say talk to your loved one or talk to family members. I'm not for that, Eddie. These people are invested in you. No, they're invested in your happiness. They need you to be happy. But also, if you bring a problem of that magnitude to them or something they don't understand, the immediate human response is to say, well, what have I done wrong? Well, you know, what's wrong with our marriage? Yeah. What's wrong with this? Totally. You know, and they go into fixer mode or accusation mode or defense mode. You don't want that in your first interaction. You know, it's going to need to be part of the process.
And that could make you pull back from it and start playing it down. Is it, oh no, I'm just opening up to you. It's not that bad. Everything's okay.
Exactly.
Well, then you don't go anywhere with that, would they?
And that's usually what happens with friends.
Yeah.
You know, friends either minimize or distract. Oh, well, at least you're not like Paul. You know, Paul's got this going on.
Or get a pint into you.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Let's go and have a pint. Let's go and watch the football. You know, McTominay scored an absolute peak. You know, it's distraction or minimization. You don't need that in your first interaction. There are literally hundreds and thousands of people who are qualified and trained and paid to be invested in your wellness. And they're not going to try and distract you. They're not going to immediately, they're not even going to try and fix you. What they are going to do is hear you and guide you on the pathway to your potential solution. Go there first. Go there first, because also they have to professionally keep your confidence. It will be private between you and them. So there are a lot of narratives about it's good to talk and blah, 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 blah. Do you know what? It's A-okay if it's your business and no one else's. It's A-okay if you just go to that professional place and you manage and deal with what's going on here. And please do that, because I can tell you now, I didn't want to engage because I was worried about what people thought and that it'd make me a shit dad and husband and rubbish at my job. I sit here today, 8 years down the line, I am the most well I've ever been, and that's made me the most competent, confident, capable human that I've ever been. I'm the best father that I've ever been, the best husband, the best son, so say I, but also the best worker. You know, so this could be the beginning of that pathway to the best you. Make sure it's the right beginning.
Thank you so much, Clarke. Thank you. Okay, so 3 songs.
Yes.
Not particularly the best songs, 3 significant songs throughout your life, and maybe speak for a few seconds about why they were so significant.
Okay, in football, when you move clubs, you usually have to sing. It's an initiation ritual, and I always chose Three Little Birds, Bob Marley, because I love the song, but it took a greater meaning for me. You know, when now what I found is I had a total intolerance for uncertainty. You know, and now with my wellness, I've learned to embrace that I can't control everything, and handing over to my higher power, and sitting there and thinking, don't worry, Clarky, about a thing, because every little thing is going to be all right. I sing it and hum it, you know, just in my day and in my car, and it anchors me in that knowledge that I don't have to be in control of everything out there. It's going to be all right.
Amazing. What would be your second
My
choice?
second one is probably one that a lot of people will choose, but it's my wedding song with Carrie, but it has such a deeper meaning. You know, it's Etta James, At Last, and that was our wedding song, and it's going to make me cry, because, you know, you can get into a mindset, especially when you're in addiction, and especially when you see challenge and difficulty at every corner. You're like, why always me? It's everything turns to shit. You know, why does nothing work out for me? And in the end, I found my human, Eddie. Yeah. I found my human, a woman who unconditionally loves me, something that I never ever thought possible. At last. You know, so just that perseverance, that turning up every day, and you can get your at last. And that's what I found with my wife.
Amazing, Clarke.
And
number 3.
And number 3, it's not a song, it's an album. It's Logical Progression, Level 1, LTJ Buckham. And I lost music for a long time. Because I've got that analytical mind, I get into lyrics and meanings of words, and they catch me and they hook me. But LTJ Buckham, drum and bass, absolute master. That whole album, there's no lyrics in it, and I can listen to it no matter what space I'm in. It's why I love classical music as well. No matter what space I'm in, I can listen to it, and there are no lyrics directing me to what to think. I can just take it wherever I want to go, and I absolutely love it. An hour and 7 minutes of just, you know, just going with that flow. If I could have another one, it'd be Dance Macabre as well. That's my favourite classical music tune, but that's all.
You only get 3. Clarke Carlisle, thank you so much for coming on Listen Up podcast. Thank you so much for being so accommodating since you've come up here into Scotland and meeting us since last night. I wish you well for the future, and hopefully we'll stay in touch over that time as well. And thank you so much, Clarke.
Oh, thank you for having me, and this definitely is not the end. This is the beginning of a beautiful relationship.
Amazing. Thank you.